My wife inherited $10 M. Then she said, "I want a divorce. Now I don't need you anymore." Imagine this: your partner inherits $10 million. And the next thing you know, they're telling you, "I don't need you anymore. I'm rich now, goodbye." You won't believe what happens next. In this jaw-dropping story, we'll see betrayal, greed, and revenge like never before. Stick around to see how this plays out, because you won't see the shocking twist coming. I never imagined that my life would take the turn it did. As a kid, I was taught that hard work was everything. My name is Lucas Mitchell, and I grew up in a small town in Alabama. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, and life felt simple. My family wasn't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but we didn't go hungry either. My parents worked tirelessly, instilling in me values of dedication, respect, and perseverance. I'd spend my mornings helping my dad in the garage, fixing cars and getting my hands dirty, and my evenings were filled with quiet family dinners. The kind of routine that made you feel like you were part of something important, even if it was just the cycle of a small, hard-working town. My world had purpose, rhythm, and structure. But everything changed the moment I met her. Victoria Evans. She was a force, the kind of woman who seemed destined for a life far beyond what this town could offer. Tall, strikingly beautiful, with eyes that seemed to see through everything, and an air of confidence that commanded attention. I first saw her one afternoon, browsing in a bookstore near the center of town, her fingers delicately turning the pages of a business magazine. She looked so out of place among the worn wooden shelves and old books, dressed in a crisp white blouse and designer shoes that clicked on the hardwood floor with each step she took. But there was something about her, something magnetic that drew me in, as if her world and mine were destined to collide, even though they couldn't have been more different. We struck up a conversation, and in that moment, I felt an instant connection. She had this way of speaking that made everything sound like a grand possibility, as though nothing was out of reach. She talked about the future with this kind of fire, a fire that made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could dream bigger than fixing cars in a garage for the rest of my life. She had ambition in every word, and I admired that. I was drawn to her, and in a way, she was drawn to me too. I had a calm, grounded nature that she seemed to find fascinating. I liked how she made me feel like I could be more than just the guy who fixed engines. I could be someone who built a future. A better future. We moved fast, perhaps too fast. It wasn't long before we were engaged, and even though my parents were cautious, they were happy for us. They helped us pay for the wedding, though I never asked them to. They did it because they wanted to see us happy, to give us a start in life. My father pulled me aside the night before the wedding. His voice, gravelly with years of hard work, was laced with concern. "Son," he said, his hand heavy on my shoulder, "love is more than just feelings. It's about respect. About having each other's backs when times get tough. Make sure she understands that." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was just excited to marry Victoria, to start a new chapter in our lives. After we tied the knot, things seemed perfect at first. We moved into an apartment in the city, a place Victoria had always dreamed of. It had marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a kitchen that was more for show than anything else. I remember the look on her face when she saw it for the first time. A smile so wide. It almost didn't seem real. It was everything she wanted. And because I wanted her to be happy, it became everything I wanted too. I worked hard, took on extra shifts at the garage, saved up every penny, hoping to make our life better. But Victoria, she wasn't quite on the same page. She tried working a few office jobs, but they never lasted long. "They don't pay me enough," she would say. "I'm meant for bigger things." At first, I didn't think much of it. I worked harder. After all, that's what I knew. Hard work pays off. But slowly, I started to see the cracks. Victoria didn't see the value in my hard work, in the life I was building. She resented it. She resented the small town life I came from. My parents, who had always been there for us, helping us out when things got tight, started to feel like a burden to her. She'd roll her eyes whenever I suggested we visit the farm. "It smells like manure," she'd complain. "I don't want to ruin my shoes." And every time my father asked for help fixing something, she'd just laugh it off. "I married you, not your farm," she'd joke. But the jokes were starting to sting. I tried to brush it off, told myself that maybe she just needed time to adjust. But the tension between us started to grow. She wasn't happy with our life, the life I had worked so hard to build. She complained about the apartment, about the neighborhood, about everything. She started saying things like, "Don't you ever want more? More." It was always more. "Look at us," she'd say, staring out the window of our apartment at the city lights. "Living in this tiny place. Working jobs that barely excite us. I want a bigger life, don't you?" She was right about one thing, I did want more. But I also knew that more didn't come without hard work. I told her that. I told her that we were building something together. That it was going to take time, but it would pay off. But Victoria wasn't patient. She didn't want to wait. She didn't want to put in the effort. She wanted shortcuts. She started talking about flipping houses, investing in luxury real estate, getting into passive income. Anything but working the way I did. "You work so hard, Nathan," she'd say, "but what if we could be smarter? What if we didn't have to work so hard?" That was when I knew she wasn't looking for success, she was looking for an escape. And then, it happened. My life changed in an instant. Victoria's estranged uncle, a wealthy businessman, passed away unexpectedly. I knew she wasn't close to him, barely spoke about him. But she'd always mentioned that he had money. A lot of money. And then, just like that, everything shifted. Victoria inherited his entire estate. $10 million. At first I was happy for her. I was happy that she'd gotten what she wanted. But as soon as the news sunk in, I began to feel a strange unease. She was so happy. She was ecstatic, practically glowing. She barely knew her uncle, but here she was, grinning like she had just won the lottery. The more she talked about it, the more I realized she wasn't thinking about us. She was thinking about herself. The life she could finally have without me, without the effort, without the struggle. And that's when it hit me, I wasn't the man she needed anymore. The days following Victoria's inheritance felt like a blur. At first, it was the kind of excitement I should have been happy about. She had always dreamed of a life beyond the one we had: luxury, freedom, and everything that came with wealth. But it didn't take long for that excitement to morph into something darker. I remember how her voice changed when she spoke about her uncle's estate, how she no longer talked about we or us, but always I and me. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the slow shift of the tide before it crashes on the shore. She was different, and I could feel it in the air, thick with tension. It was a Tuesday morning when she walked into the living room, with a big smile on her face, holding a letter from the lawyer. Her eyes were practically sparkling as she looked at me, almost as if she had been waiting for this moment her whole life. "I did it, Lucas," she said, her voice almost breathless with excitement. "We're rich." She was practically giddy. At that moment, I still didn't understand the weight of her words, the gravity of what was happening. I should have, but I didn't. I just stared at her, trying to grasp what she was saying. Her eyes, full of ambition, were all I could see. The life I had worked so hard to build seemed to disappear in those moments. When I asked her to explain, she barely gave me a moment to process it. She told me about her uncle, about how she had always known. He had money, but never imagined he'd leave it all to her. She had been his only living relative, and now his empire was hers. His properties, his investments, his business, all of it. The sheer scale of what she was talking about was almost too much to grasp. For a moment, I tried to feel happy for her, but I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my gut. Something didn't sit right. Her excitement wasn't just about the money, it was about what the money meant. As she paced around the apartment, listing all the things she could now buy, the houses she could own, the places she could go, I couldn't help but feel a growing distance between us. She wasn't thinking about us anymore. She was thinking about herself, her new life, her new identity. The woman who once told me she wanted to build a future together had been replaced by someone who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone to something greater. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that this was just her moment of realization, a moment of excitement. But the deeper I looked, the more I saw how much she had changed. It didn't take long for her to start pulling away. At first, it was just small things like the way she would leave for lunch with friends and come back. Hours later, her phone constantly buzzing with notifications that she never seemed to want to explain. But then came the big change. The first time she told me that she didn't want to go visit my parents. She had always hated the farm, but I never expected her to come out and say it so plainly. "I don't want to spend my weekends with them anymore," she said one afternoon, sitting on the couch, a glass of champagne in her hand. "They're nice people, Lucas, but they're so different from me. I want to be around people who understand the life I'm living now." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. She never once tried to understand my life, the life that had shaped me into the man I was. My parents had always been there for us, always supportive, but now that we had money, they were nothing more than a reminder of her past, a past she wanted to erase. I stood there, speechless, unsure of how to respond. It was the first time I truly realized that she wasn't just rejecting the life we built. She was rejecting me. And that was something I wasn't prepared for. But I didn't say anything. Not then. I didn't want to start a fight. I thought maybe this was just a phase, maybe she needed time to adjust. But as the days passed, the cracks in our relationship widened. The tension in the air grew unbearable, thick with unspoken words and unmet expectations. She didn't need me anymore, not in the way she once had. She needed my hard work, my loyalty, my willingness to sacrifice, but she didn't need me, the man I was. She didn't need the life we shared. And that realization, the slow burn of it, tore me apart. Victoria's behavior became more erratic as the days went by. She spent money like it was nothing, buying expensive clothes, designer bags, and extravagant trips. The apartment, once a symbol of our new life together, seemed to lose its meaning. It wasn't enough for her anymore. Nothing was ever enough. She'd talked about moving into a mansion, about how we could live like royalty, how we could travel the world. But every time she mentioned these things, I felt smaller, insignificant. My dreams, our dreams, seemed to fade into the background as her ambition took center stage. She stopped listening to me. She stopped caring. And I couldn't help but wonder if this was all part of a bigger plan. Was she just waiting for the moment when she could leave me behind? Was she planning this from the start? Or had the money just changed everything for her? Then came the moment I knew it was over. One evening, after a night out with her new friends, people she met through her growing social circle of wealthy individuals, Victoria came home, glowing. She was practically buzzing with excitement. "You won't believe what I did," she said, a devilish smile playing at the corner of her lips. "I got an offer for my own real estate business. It's a huge opportunity, Lucas. It's everything we've dreamed of." I stared at her, trying to understand. She was no longer the woman I had fallen in love with. The woman who once told me she wanted a simple life. The woman who cared about the small moments, the quiet nights at home. Now, she was someone else. Someone who had completely lost touch with who we were, with who I was. And then, she said it. The words that shattered everything. "I want a divorce," she said, almost casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I don't need you anymore, Lucas. I have everything I've ever wanted. I'm going to live my life the way I deserve." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to yell at her, to tell her everything she was doing to me, to us. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching her pack her things, watching her leave as though our entire life together had meant nothing. She had already moved on. The divorce papers came a few days later. She didn't even bother to read them, her lawyer making sure everything was as quick and painless as possible. The house we had shared, the home I had worked so hard to make ours, was suddenly no longer hers. She didn't care. She had already moved on to bigger and better things, things she thought were waiting for her outside of this life, outside of me. But that was the moment I realized something. While she was out there, living a life of luxury and excitement, I was still standing in the ruins of what we once had. The truth hit me harder than I could have imagined. She didn't love me. She never did. She loved the idea of me, the idea of what I could provide. But she didn't care about me. Not really. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. I wasn't the man she wanted anymore. The man who worked hard, who cared about the future we could build together. No, she wanted something else, something bigger, something that didn't involve me. But what I didn't know yet was that she was about to learn the hard way that all that glitters isn't gold. Hold on, just when you thought things couldn't get worse, something unexpected happens. What will Lucas do when everything he thought he knew about Victoria is shattered? How far will she go to regain control? Drop a comment below. Do you think Lucas will stand firm, or will he cave to her desperation? Comment 1 revenge. Comment 2 forgiveness. In the days that followed Victoria's departure, I tried to hold myself together, telling myself that it would all blow over. She was gone now, and though the house felt emptier without her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I wasn't going to beg her to come back. She had made her choice, and deep down, I knew I had to let go. But what I didn't realize was just how quickly her world was unraveling behind the scenes. At first, she seemed unbothered. Every post on social media painted a picture of a woman who had finally gotten everything. She wanted expensive dinners, designer clothes, vacations to places I couldn't have even dreamed of. She was living a life I could never have imagined for her. And yet, as the weeks went on, I started to hear whispers. It wasn't long before the stories began circulating, ones I couldn't ignore. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a phone call from an old friend of Victoria's, someone I hadn't heard from in years. "Hey, Lucas, I don't know if you've heard, but Victoria's in deep," he said, his voice low, as though he were trying to keep something from the world. "What do you mean?" I asked, my stomach churning with dread. "She's been borrowing money left and right, Lucas. People are starting to ask questions." I could hear the hesitation in his voice, but his words hit me like a cold wave. Victoria, the woman who had once told me how she was going to take the world by storm, was already drowning in it. But what shocked me the most was the realization that she hadn't even seen it coming. As I stood there, the reality of it all sank in. She hadn't just walked away from me. She had walked away from the very foundation she had built her life on. And now, the walls were starting to close in. The wealthy social circle she had been so eager to join, it wasn't what she thought it was. Soon after that phone call, I started receiving more messages, texts, emails, even some vague mentions in conversations at the bar. Her name was being whispered among people I hadn't heard from in years. But it wasn't the kind of talk I wanted to hear. It wasn't just that she was living a lavish lifestyle. It was that people were beginning to notice that she wasn't as secure as she wanted them to think. They noticed how fast she was spending the money, how quickly her accounts were draining, and how little she actually understood about the true value of wealth. I knew that Victoria hadn't been prepared for the responsibility of it all. She thought money would fix everything, fix the emptiness she felt, fix the relationships she couldn't seem to make work. But money, as I learned the hard way, isn't the answer to everything. And now, Victoria was finding that out the hard way too. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of bad decisions and broken promises. The calls kept coming. The stories kept spreading. Her so-called friends started pulling away, and it wasn't long before the luxurious life she had imagined for herself began to show cracks. I could almost feel her desperation as it seeped through the cracks of her perfect facade. Victoria had always been a woman who craved attention, who craved admiration. But what she didn't understand was that people, the ones who once adored her for her flashy lifestyle, weren't going to be there for her when the money ran out. They weren't going to be there when the truth about her inheritance came to light. I remember the first time I heard her name on the news. It was a story about her uncle's estate, the one she had inherited so joyously. The headline read, "Millionaire's inheritance turns out to be $1 million debt." I couldn't believe my eyes. The entire estate, which Victoria thought was a treasure trove of wealth, was in shambles. Her uncle had left behind a mountain of debt, all of it tied to a failed business venture that had been kept under wraps until now. And that inheritance that she had thought would make her untouchable, it was nothing more than a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. When I read the article, I felt a sick sense of satisfaction. But there was something else too, a deeper, darker feeling. I wasn't happy to see her fail. No, that wasn't it. But I wasn't going to lie to myself. Part of me had always known this was going to happen. Victoria had always thought she could escape the consequences of her actions. She thought money would shield her from the world. But now, as her world was collapsing around her, I couldn't help but feel a sense of inevitability. This was the price of living a life based on illusion. And she was paying it. I tried not to pay too much attention to it. I focused on my own life, my work, and the house that I had fought so hard to keep. But even though I tried to turn my attention away, I couldn't escape the whispers that were growing louder and louder. Victoria was no longer the woman who left me behind with a cold, heartless smile. She was now a cautionary tale, a warning to everyone who thought they could chase the dream without facing the reality. It was only a matter of time before I heard from her. The phone rang late one night, and I already knew who it was before I picked up. Lucas. Her voice was shaky, almost pleading. I need to talk. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, letting her feel the weight of what she had done, the depth of her mistakes. Finally, I spoke, keeping my tone steady. What do you need, Victoria? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She hesitated for a moment before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I've lost everything, Lucas, she said, her words heavy with the weight of realization. The money, it's all gone. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought I could keep up, but I was wrong. I don't know where to go. I need your help. Her words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her. After all, we had shared a life once. But another part of me knew the truth. She wasn't sorry for what she had done to me. She was sorry because the life she had built was crumbling, and now, she had nowhere else to turn. I let the silence settle again before I responded. Victoria, I said, my voice calm but firm, you made your choice. You walked away from me, from everything we had. And now, you want to come back because everything else has fallen apart. I'm not your safety net. I could hear her on the other end, her breath catching, a sob choking her words. But I didn't soften. She needed to hear it. She needed to understand that the game she had been playing was over. You thought you could escape the consequences, I said, but you can't. You wanted everything without working for it, and now, look where you are. There was no response from her, just the sound of her breathing, heavy with regret. But it was too late for apologies. She had burned those bridges long ago. I'm sorry, Lucas, she finally whispered, but the words didn't carry the weight they used to. Not anymore. I hung up the phone, knowing this was the last time I would ever hear from her. I had to let go. I had already moved on, but now, she had to face the truth that there was no way back. The story she had been living was a lie, and the world was catching up with her. It didn't take long for Victoria's desperate calls to come flooding in. Every time the phone rang, my heart would skip a beat, but I wasn't fooled. Her voice, strained and weak, had become a constant reminder of the choices she made and the consequences she now had to face. I knew she was struggling, but there was a part of me that couldn't help but feel a certain satisfaction in watching her unravel. The woman who had walked away from everything we had, who had discarded me like I was nothing, was now begging for something that wasn't going to come easily: redemption. The first few calls, I didn't pick up. I let her messages pile up, each one more desperate than the last. Lucas, please, I need to talk. I know I messed up, she would say, but I didn't respond. I wasn't going to let her back into my life, just because she needed someone to fix her mistakes. I wasn't the person she thought I was anymore, and she had to understand that. The lies, the betrayal, they all came flooding back every time I thought of her. But it wasn't just the calls. Victoria had become a topic of conversation everywhere I went. People who had once looked at her with admiration, her friends, her so-called circle, were now whispering behind her back. It was like the walls were closing in on her, and she didn't even know it. There was one evening when I ran into Dan, an old acquaintance who used to hang around her new wealthy friends. He didn't seem the type to keep in touch, but here he was, giving me a look that spoke volumes. I don't know if you've heard, man, but Victoria's in trouble, he said, almost apologetically. She's been asking around for money. Small loans at first, but now. He trailed off, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. People are starting to avoid her, Lucas. She's burned through everything. I didn't respond at first, letting the weight of his words sink in. It was exactly what I had expected. Victoria had always thought she could spend her way out of anything. But now, that bubble she had so carefully crafted for herself was bursting, and she had no idea how to stop it. What do you mean by everything? I finally asked, though I already knew. She's been selling stuff, Lucas. Designer bags, clothes, jewelry, you name it. She even tried to sell her car a few days ago, didn't even get half of what she thought it was worth. It's bad, man. My mind raced. How could someone so smart, so driven, have fallen so hard? Victoria had always prided herself on being ahead of the game, the one who had the plan, the one who could do whatever it took to get ahead. But she hadn't realized that all that glitters doesn't always stay gold. And now, The truth was catching up with her. A few days later, I saw her again. This time, it wasn't a call, it was in person. I had been out grabbing a coffee when I saw her walk into the cafe. At first, I didn't recognize her. She had always been impeccably put together, but now, she looked different. Her clothes were still expensive, but they were worn, and there was a nervous energy about her that I hadn't seen before. She wasn't the woman I had married. She was something else, someone who had lost control of her life. Victoria sat at a corner table, head down, scrolling through her phone. The image of her sitting there alone, looking small and defeated, sent a strange jolt through me. I wanted to feel sorry for her, but I didn't. I remembered the way she had treated me, the way she had tossed me aside without a second thought. Now, she was living the life she had dreamed of. But the cost was becoming painfully clear. I stood there for a moment, watching her, but didn't approach. I wasn't going to be the person who picked up the pieces of her broken life, not again. And I wasn't going to play the fool. As I turned to leave, I heard her voice call out to me. "Lucas," she said, her tone tentative, as though she wasn't sure if she even had the right to speak to me anymore. I turned around slowly, meeting her gaze. But there was no warmth there anymore, just the cold truth of what had happened between us. "What do you want, Victoria?" I asked, my voice steady, though my insides were anything but. She stood up, a look of panic in her eyes. "I need your help," she said, her voice shaking. I've made a mess of everything. I didn't know how to handle it. Please just listen." I crossed my arms, my expression hardening. "You didn't need me when you had everything. What makes you think I'm going to help you now?" Her face fell, but she quickly tried to regain control. "I'm not asking for much. Just some time to get things back on track." I never realized what I had until it was too late. I shook my head. "You didn't need time to figure it out before. You walked away from me without a second thought. You thought you could have it all, but now that it's all crumbling, you come crawling back. I'm not your safety net, Victoria. I'm not here to pick up the pieces of your mess." She stepped forward, desperation in her eyes. "I was wrong, okay? I see that now. I thought the money would make me happy. I thought I could have everything. But it's all falling apart, and I don't know where else to go. I've lost everything." I stared at her, watching the woman who had once rejected me with such ease, who had discarded our life together like it didn't matter, now pleading for my help. It was hard to even recognize her. There was no glimmer of the woman who had once demanded so much from me. There was no fire, no ambition. There was only a person who had come face to face with the consequences of their choices. "You think I don't know that?" I said, my voice colder than I intended. "You wanted a new life, Victoria. And now you've got it. You've got everything you wanted until it all went to hell." Her face flushed with embarrassment, but she didn't back down. "Please," she said again, the word laced with desperation. "I need help. I don't know who else to turn to. I didn't know it would be like this. Please." I stood there, watching her, feeling a strange mix of emotions. I didn't want to feel sorry for her. I didn't want to be the one to clean up the mess she had made. But something inside me, a small part of me, wanted to reach out. Wanted to be the person who could help. But I couldn't. I had already given too much. She had already taken too much. "You made your choice, Victoria," I said, finally stepping back. "And now, you're going to have to live with it. I can't fix this for you. No one can." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, watching me go. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't look back. Days turned into weeks, and Victoria's calls became more infrequent, but the chaos surrounding her continued to spiral. It seemed like she couldn't help herself. She had dug herself into a hole too deep to climb out of. The more I watched from the sidelines, the more I realized just how much she had underestimated the reality of her situation. She had once walked away from me with a sense of superiority, thinking she was invincible with all the money in the world. But now, it was clear that her world was crumbling. I had heard the rumors, but when I saw it with my own eyes, it hit me harder than I had expected. It was a rainy Friday afternoon when I passed by one of the high-end restaurants, where Victoria had once frequented, dining with wealthy businessmen and socialites, flaunting her newfound status. The place had become a symbol of her transformation, the woman who had once prided herself on hard work, now basking in the luxury she thought she deserved. But today, as I looked through the window, I saw something entirely different. Victoria was sitting alone at a corner booth, her head down, staring at her phone, a stark contrast to the confident woman I had once known. Her face was drawn, pale, and tired. She wasn't the picture of success anymore. Instead, she looked like someone who had run out of options. I noticed her clutching a small, cheap-looking purse, one that seemed out of place compared to the designer bags she had used to carry around like trophies. Her clothes, though still expensive, seemed worn, as though she was doing everything she could to make them last. She looked like a woman who was struggling to hold on to something that had already slipped through her fingers. I stood there for a moment, not sure what I was hoping for, maybe an apology, maybe an explanation. But all I felt was a sense of inevitability. It was as though she had painted herself into a corner, and no matter how much she tried to pretend otherwise, she couldn't escape the reality she had created. She had played her cards, and now the game was over. As I turned to leave, I heard a voice from behind me. "Lucas!" It was her, calling out to me with an almost desperate urgency. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't turn around immediately. I couldn't. Not after everything. Not after everything she had done to me. But she called my name again, more insistently this time. "Lucas, please, wait. I need to talk to you." Against my better judgment, I turned around and walked toward her. The distance between us felt like miles. The last time I had seen her, she had been so full of life, so certain that the world was at her feet. But now, the woman in front of me seemed so small, so fragile. It was almost like seeing a ghost, a version of her that had been shattered by her own choices. "What do you want, Victoria?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. I didn't want to show any sympathy, not after everything she had put me through. Not after the way she had thrown me away like I was nothing, as if I were disposable. But standing in front of her, I realized I was still angry. Angrier than I had ever been. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a kind of vulnerability I hadn't seen in her before. "I know I screwed up," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you. I was wrong. Please, just listen." I stood there, my arms crossed, unwilling to make the first move. "Listen?" I repeated, my voice tinged with disbelief. "What do you expect me to do, Victoria? You made your choices. You walked away when you thought you didn't need me. You thought you could have it all, and now you're here asking for my help. What exactly do you think I can do for you?" Her face faltered at the words, but she pressed on, desperate. "I know I messed up, Lucas. I see that now. I thought money would fix everything. I thought I could have the life I wanted, the life I deserved. But I was wrong. I never understood what I had until it was gone. I can't fix this on my own." I shook my head, feeling the weight of her words sinking in. "You were never about fixing things, were you? You just wanted to have everything without earning it, without understanding what it takes to build something meaningful." She swallowed hard, but she didn't back down. "I'm not asking you to fix everything. I know I've lost everything, my friends, my family, my reputation. But I just need a little help. Just until I can get back on my feet. Please, Lucas. I'm not asking for a handout. I just need a chance to start over." The sincerity in her voice made me pause. But only for a second. Deep down, I knew this wasn't the Victoria I had fallen in love with. She had changed. She had let greed and ambition blind her to the things that truly mattered. And now, she was facing the consequences. "You had your chance," I said, the words bitter in my mouth. "And you walked away. You made your bed, Victoria. Now you have to lie in it." She shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much you meant to me. I was stupid, Lucas. I was so focused on what I didn't have that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. You. Us." I wanted to feel sorry for her. I really did. But the anger inside me, the anger that had been simmering for so long, kept me from feeling anything but frustration. You don't get to come back after all this. You don't get to tear everything down and expect me to fix it for you. You had everything, Victoria. You had me. And you chose to throw it all away for a life that wasn't even real. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she was going to break down completely. But she didn't. Instead, she took a step back, her shoulders sagging. She looked defeated, broken, like a woman who had finally come to terms with what she had lost. "I understand," she said quietly, the words heavy with the weight of realization. I never really understood until now. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, watching her, waiting for something to change. But nothing did. There was no magic moment of reconciliation. There was no grand apology that would make everything right. Victoria had made her choices, and now, she had to face the consequences alone. I think it's time for you to go, Victoria, I said, my voice firm. I turned to leave, knowing that there was nothing left to say. As I walked away, I didn't look back. This time, I knew for sure that I was done. The woman I once loved had already walked away from me, and now, I was walking away from her. There was no turning back, not this time. As I walked away from Victoria, leaving her standing there with nothing but her shattered pride, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality settle in. I thought I was done, thought I could let go of the past and move forward. But as much as I wanted to believe I was free from the tangled mess she had left me in, there was still something inside me that couldn't fully let go. I had watched her destroy herself. But now, as she sank deeper into the consequences of her actions, I realized that this was only the beginning of the end. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. I focused on my work, the one constant in my life that had never let me down. The garage was a sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the steady rhythm of tools, engines, and oil. But even there, I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that something was off. Victoria was out there somewhere, spiraling, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go to fix what she had broken. Then came the call. It was late one evening when my phone buzzed, and the name on the screen made my heart skip a beat. Victoria. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail, and pretend like she didn't exist anymore. But another part of me, a part I tried to suppress, felt the pull. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the lingering hope that she had learned her lesson. Whatever it was, I answered. Lucas, she said, her voice raw, different from the confident tone I used to hear. There was no arrogance this time, no sense of entitlement. She sounded tired, drained. I need to talk. Please. I could hear the desperation in her voice, and for a moment, I wondered if I had been wrong. Maybe she was finally seeing the truth of what she had done. Maybe this was the apology I had been waiting for, the one that would bring us some sense of closure. But I wasn't naive anymore. I wasn't the same man I had been when she first walked out on me. I'm listening, I said, my voice steady, but with a coldness that I couldn't hide. She took a long breath before speaking again, her words coming out in a rush, like she was afraid I would hang up before she had the chance to explain. I don't know where to turn, Lucas. I've lost everything. The money, the people I thought were my friends, they're all gone. I've made so many mistakes, and I don't know how to fix it. Please, I just need some help. I don't have anywhere else to go. The words hit me harder than I expected. It was exactly what I had feared, exactly what I had known would happen. She had used up all her chances, and now, she was paying the price. But there was something else in her voice, something that told me this wasn't just about the money. This wasn't just about her losing her wealth. This was about losing everything she had ever built her life around. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to reach out, to help her. But the other part, the stronger part, knew that this was a lesson she had to learn on her own. She had walked away from me without a second thought. But now, when everything was falling apart, she thought she could come back and pick up the pieces? It didn't work like that. I'm sorry, Victoria, I said, my voice firm. I can't help you anymore. You had everything, and you threw it away. You wanted a life without consequences, but now you're seeing the price you have to pay. I'm not going to be the one to save you from that. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought she had hung up, but then I heard her voice again, softer now, tinged with something like regret. Lucas, I was wrong. I see that now. I thought I could have it all. I thought money would make me happy, but it didn't. It never did. I was blind to everything that mattered. And now I've lost everything: the house, my friends, my dignity. Please, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. Her words were laced with a desperation I had never heard before. But I wasn't moved by them. I had seen her in her prime, confident, arrogant, acting like she could walk through life without ever facing the consequences. Now, she was a shell of the person she had once been. clinging to the hope that I would come to her rescue. But I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to be her savior. I wasn't going to let her back into my life just because she had lost her way. You made your choices, Victoria, I said, my voice cold but steady. And now you're paying for them. I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. You don't get to come back to me when everything else falls apart. I won't be the one to clean up your mess. She was silent for a moment, and I could hear her breathing in the background. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, the kind that made you realize just how far someone had fallen. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Please, don't hang up. Please, I'm begging you. I didn't respond immediately. I was done talking. There was nothing left to say. But then, as I stood there, listening to her desperation on the other end of the line, something inside me snapped. I realized that this wasn't just about her, it was about me, too. About the years I had wasted on someone who never truly valued me. About the life I had fought for, only to have it thrown away by someone who couldn't appreciate it. I'm not your safety net, Victoria, I said, my voice steady, but full of finality. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. I'm not going to be the one to fix your life for you. You have to do that yourself. You can't keep running away from your mistakes. And with that, I hung up the phone. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to hear her like that, broken and desperate. But in that moment, I knew it was the right decision. She had to face the consequences of her actions, just like I had to face the consequences of letting her into my life in the first place. I wasn't going to be her escape anymore. I turned away from the phone, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. Victoria was gone. For good this time. And I was finally free. The silence after I hung up the phone felt different this time. The weight of it settled deep within me, like the final chapter of a story I had no interest in reopening. I had cut the cord. There was no going back, no more second chances for Victoria. And yet, the hollow feeling that lingered in my chest told me that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. It wasn't just about ending our relationship. It was about watching her fall. Watching someone who had once believed they were untouchable crumble right before your eyes. And, if I'm being honest, I wasn't sure whether I felt relief or something else. A dark sense of satisfaction. Perhaps. But what was clearer than ever was that the life I had worked so hard to build was no longer tied to her. But just when I thought I could finally move on, I got the call that changed everything. It was almost 2 weeks later when I saw her again. This time, I didn't have a choice. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those rare moments of peace, when everything in my world seemed to slow down. I had just finished mowing the lawn, the sun low in the sky, casting a soft golden light over the yard. It was the kind of day that made me feel like I was finally in control of my life. Like I had nothing left to prove. The phone rang, and instinctively, I knew it was her. Victoria. My stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it go straight to voicemail. But a darker part of me wanted to hear her out. I picked up. Lucas, she said, her voice shaky and unfamiliar. It was softer now, not the demanding, confident voice I remembered. This time, it was the voice of someone who had been through hell and had nowhere else to turn. What do you want, Victoria? I asked, my tone clipped, not giving an inch. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, trying to muster the courage to speak. I could almost picture her there, standing in some quiet, lonely room, her face pale, her hands trembling. It made me sick to think about it. But I wasn't going to let her back in. Not after everything she had done. I need your help, she stammered. Please. I've lost everything. I'm not the person I was before. I was wrong. I never realized how much I needed you, Lucas. But now I see. I've destroyed everything, and I don't know how to fix it. Please. I'm begging you. Her words were like poison, soaking through the line. She had been so confident, so sure of herself, but now she sounded small. Defeated. It wasn't the Victoria I knew, and it sure as hell wasn't the woman I had once loved. But I wasn't fooled. The desperation in her voice didn't change the truth. I had already made my choice. I had already closed that door, and I wasn't about to open it again. You didn't need me before, I said, my voice cold, every word sharp. You walked away, remember? You thought you could have it all, thought you could do this without me. And now that everything has crumbled, you want my help? Why should I give it to you? I didn't realize, she faltered, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I didn't realize how much I had until it was gone. I thought the money would fix everything. I thought it would make me happy, but it didn't. It was all a lie. You were right. You were right about everything. But now I'm lost. I have nowhere to go, Lucas. Please, I'm not asking for much. Just a little help. Just until I can get back on my feet. Her words hung in the air like a cloud of smoke. I could hear her guilt, her regret, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter how many times she apologized. It didn't matter how much she claimed she had changed. The truth was, she had burned every bridge she ever had. I had watched her walk away from me, from the life we built together, and now, she was trying to come crawling back because things weren't going the way she wanted. You made your choices, Victoria, I said, my voice unwavering. You wanted to live this life, to chase something that wasn't real. And now you've lost everything. You thought you could just walk away from me, from everything, and nothing would catch up with you. Well, here we are, and I'm not the one who's going to fix this for you. She was silent for a moment. The kind of silence that made my skin crawl. I didn't want to hear her plead. I didn't want to listen to her anymore. I didn't care if she was sorry, or if she realized how wrong she had been. I had already let go. I had already moved on. She had no place in my life anymore. But then, her voice broke through the silence again, softer this time, almost a whisper. Lucas, she said, her voice barely audible. I don't have anywhere else to go. I don't know what else to do. I can't fix this on my own. Please. I don't expect you to forgive me, but can you at least help me just this once? Just enough to get by. I stood there, holding the phone, my mind racing. This was it. The moment of truth. I had already made my decision, but hearing her so vulnerable, so desperate, made something in me twist. I wanted to say something, anything, but the truth was, she had already made her bed. I'm sorry, Victoria, I said finally, my voice steady and calm. I can't do this. I can't help you. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I'm done. I'm not your safety net. You walked away from me once, and now you're asking me to catch you when you fall? It doesn't work like that. The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment. The silence in the room ringing in my ears. I wasn't sure if I felt relief or something else, anger, maybe? Or maybe it was just the cold realization that there was no turning back. I had finally done it. I had finally let go of the past. And then, as the minutes ticked by, the reality of it all began to settle in. I wasn't just cutting ties with her. I was cutting ties with everything I thought I knew about myself. I had spent so long trying to fix things, trying to make it work. But I wasn't that man anymore. The man who gave everything without question. That man was gone. I had finally broken free. But even so, there was a part of me that couldn't help but wonder how long would it take for Victoria to realize that the world she had built, the one she had thought she could buy, was a house of cards, ready to fall at any moment? And when it did, who would be left to pick up the pieces? Certainly not me. The days that followed Victoria's final attempt to reach me felt like an eternity. Her words, pleading and desperate, echoed in my mind, but I stood firm. I had made my decision, and nothing was going to change it. Yet, despite my resolve, there was a nagging feeling inside me. A feeling I couldn't shake like. I was walking away from something that would eventually come back to haunt me. Maybe it was the guilt. Or maybe it was just the weight of watching someone fall from grace. Either way, I knew I couldn't let myself go back to that life. I had already endured too much, and I refused to be dragged down again. But then, as the days went by, the stories started trickling in. It wasn't from Victoria directly this time. No more phone calls. No more late-night messages asking for forgiveness. No, this time, the news came from people who had once been in her corner. People who had once idolized her for the lifestyle she had built. For the life they thought she had. And they were watching her crumble. Just as I had predicted. I remember the first time I heard about her really slipping. It was through Dan, the same guy who had given me that first piece of information about her borrowing money. This time, though, his tone was different. It wasn't filled with the pity I had heard before. There was something colder in his voice, a sense of inevitability. You haven't heard, have you? Dan asked, his voice low and tinged with something that sounded almost like satisfaction. She's really in deep now. She's lost everything, Lucas. The money, the connections, everything she thought was gonna save her. She's drowning in it. People are already turning their backs on her. I could hear the slight chuckle in his voice as he spoke, and it made my stomach turn. But at the same time, it was impossible not to feel a twisted sense of justice. For so long, Victoria had lived in her bubble, a bubble made of money, prestige, and the belief that she could do whatever she wanted without facing consequences. But now, as her world started to implode, the facade she had worked so hard to maintain was slipping away, and it wasn't pretty. I saw her the other night, Dan continued, his words hitting me like a punch to the gut. She was out with those friends of hers, the ones who used to worship her, remember? They barely looked at her. She was sitting there, trying to hold it together, but you could see it in her eyes. She's lost everything. The news hit me harder than I thought it would. Not because I cared for her anymore, no, that ship had sailed, but because I realized just how far she had fallen. She had always believed she was above it all, that she could control everything. But now, as she sat alone, desperately clinging to whatever scraps of her former life she could hold on to, I knew the truth. The high life, the wealth, the endless parties, they had all been a facade. And the worst part? She had no one to blame but herself. The following days were filled with whispers. People were talking, my old neighbors, her former friends, even people I barely knew. Everyone had a story to tell about the fall of Victoria Evans. The once goddess of the social scene was now a cautionary tale, a symbol of how quickly the mighty could fall. It was almost poetic in its own way. The way everything she had built came crashing down, piece by piece. But even more than that, it was the way she had turned her back on everything that had once mattered. The way she had discarded me, discarded the life we could have had together, all for the sake of a few fleeting moments of luxury. Now, as she sat alone in a world she didn't understand, I knew she was finally seeing the truth. But there was more to the story than what I was hearing from the outside world. There were things happening behind closed doors, things that would reveal just how badly she had miscalculated her life. I found out about the debt, about the extent of the financial mess her uncle had left behind, how the so-called inheritance she had received was nothing but a pile of unpaid bills and failed investments. It was a house of cards, built on lies and delusion, and now it was crumbling. The money, the luxury, the life she had flaunted so proudly, it was all gone, and she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her own making. One afternoon, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking a cup of coffee and trying to wrap my head around everything, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, and my heart skipped a beat. It was her. Victoria. For a second, I almost didn't pick up. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend like she didn't exist. But another part of me, the part that had been through so much with her, the part that had seen how quickly she had fallen, couldn't resist. I answered. Lucas. Her voice was softer this time, almost hesitant, like she wasn't sure what to expect. I need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my breath. I thought I made myself clear the last time. Victoria, I said, my voice low but firm. You don't get to come back. Not now, not ever. I'm not your safety net anymore. There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear her trying to gather her thoughts, trying to figure out what to say next. But I wasn't interested in her excuses. I had seen enough. I know you're angry with me, she finally said, her voice cracking, like she was on the edge of tears. But I don't know what else to do, Lucas. I've lost everything. I've ruined everything. I was wrong, and I need help. Please. Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret, but I wasn't moved. I had heard it all before. The apologies, the promises that she would change, that she would be different. But I knew better now. She was just another person trying to avoid the consequences of their own actions. You made your choices, Victoria, I said, my voice unwavering. And now, you have to live with them. I'm not here to clean up your mess. You're on your own now. And just like that, the door was closed. There was no room for forgiveness, no room for a second chance. I had let go. And as I hung up the phone, I knew for sure that there was no going back. Victoria had destroyed everything, and I wasn't about to be a part of the aftermath. She had made her bed, and now, she was going to have to lie in it. The life she had built was nothing but a fragile illusion. And now, It was shattered. There was no one left to pick up the pieces. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind. I had made my choice, cut ties with Victoria, and moved on with my life, but somehow, I couldn't shake the lingering weight of the past. It wasn't the guilt. No, it was something darker. Something deeper. It was the realization that, even though I had walked away from her, I couldn't quite escape the shadow she had cast on my life. She had been a part of me for so long, and now, as I watched her life unravel from the sidelines, I was forced to confront the harsh truth. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I once was. The anger had faded, replaced by something more sobering. It was a feeling of relief mixed with bitterness, a strange cocktail of emotions that I hadn't expected. As the days turned into weeks, the aftermath of her choices began to reveal itself. And I saw the full extent of what she had done not just to me, but to herself. It wasn't long before I started hearing the stories. The whispers, the rumors, people talking behind her back, discussing how quickly she had fallen from grace. It was almost poetic in a way, like watching a movie where the antagonist finally gets their comeuppance. And for the first time, I felt like I was watching her get what she deserved. I had spent so many years believing in her potential, believing that she could change, believing that one day she would see what really mattered. But now, all of that felt like a cruel joke. I had been part of her delusion, part of the fantasy she had built around herself. But that fantasy was long gone, replaced by the cold, hard truth. I had heard that Victoria's so-called friends had started distancing themselves from her. The people who had once flocked to her side when she was living the high life, those who admired her for her wealth, for the image she projected, had started pulling away, one by one. They were no longer interested in her. They were no longer interested in the woman who had once been the center of attention, the one who could buy anything, have anything, and yet, had nothing left. It wasn't just that she had run out of money, it was that she had run out of everything: trust, respect, dignity, the things that truly mattered. And now, the walls were closing in. I remember the first time I saw her in person again. It was a few months after I had cut ties with her. I had been to the grocery store, picking up a few things for dinner, when I ran into her. At first, I didn't recognize her. She was standing in the aisle, her back to me, scanning a shelf of canned goods. But something about the way she stood, the way she held herself slumped, like the weight of the world was on her shoulders, gave her away. I walked closer, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk the other way, pretend I hadn't seen her. But I couldn't. My feet betrayed me, and before I knew it, I was standing behind her, just a few feet away. She hadn't noticed me yet. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was now messy, her clothes simple, unremarkable. She looked lost. I stood there for a moment, just watching her, taking it all in. The woman who had once been so confident, so sure of herself, was now a shadow of the person I had known. It was like a switch had been flipped. The confidence, the bravado, the sense of entitlement gone. She was a ghost of herself. And for the first time, I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, just an overwhelming sense of finality. She turned around, and her eyes met mine. There was a flicker of recognition, followed by something else, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger or regret. It was resignation. She didn't smile. She didn't try to speak. She just stood there, frozen, like she wasn't sure what to say, or if she even had the right to say anything at all. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her voice quiet, almost timid. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to shout at her, to tell her everything I had been holding inside since she walked out of my life. But another part of me, the part that had learned to let go, just stood there. "Yeah," I finally said, my voice steady but distant. "I didn't expect to see you either." She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off before she could. "What do you want, Victoria? Why are you here? What's left for us to talk about?" Her face fell, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of the woman I had once loved, the woman who had cared, who had been real. But it was fleeting. The walls came back up quickly, and I saw the defensive mask she had perfected over the years settle into place. She hesitated, her voice cracking. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. And I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to." I wasn't looking for an apology, not from her, not after everything. But as I looked at her standing there, broken and defeated, I realized something else. She wasn't sorry for me. She was sorry for herself. Sorry that everything she had fought so hard to build had come crashing down. Sorry that the world she had built for herself, the one she thought would give her everything, had turned out to be a lie. But I wasn't part of her story anymore. I wasn't going to be dragged back into her world of illusions and broken promises. I had moved on. I had to. For my own sanity. Victoria, I said, my voice calm but firm, it's too late for this. You made your choice, and I made mine. There's nothing left for us to fix. Nothing left to say. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite identify. I thought maybe it was regret. Or maybe it was just the realization that the man who had once been by her side, the man who had given everything for her, was gone. I just thought you should know, she said quietly, her words barely a whisper. I never stopped loving you. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I wasn't that person anymore. The person who loved her unconditionally, who believed that somehow, someway, everything would work out. That person was long gone. I know, I said, my voice soft but final. But I've moved on. I've learned that love isn't enough if you don't have respect, if you don't have trust. And you lost both. And with that, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I couldn't. There was nothing left for me in that life, nothing left to salvage. I had found peace without her, a kind of peace I had never known when we were together. And now, she had to find her own way, just as I had. As I walked away from her that day, I realized that this was the end. There would be no more calls, no more apologies, no more chances. This was the final chapter. And as much as it hurt to see her like that, I knew it was the only way forward. For both of us. Wow, what an unbelievable ride. Did you see that final twist coming? Let me know, did Victoria truly change, or was it all just a game to her? Think you figured out the moral of the story? Drop a comment, and tell me what you would do in Lucas's shoes. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, if you want more shocking stories like this. The lesson here is simple, yet powerful. Success without integrity and respect is hollow. In America, where ambition drives us, it's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of wealth and status. But true fulfillment comes from hard work, trust, and valuing the relationships that matter. Don't chase shortcuts. Don't sacrifice who you are for a fleeting dream. Remember, the pursuit of happiness isn't just about what you can accumulate, but the people you build your life with, and the values you hold. Never lose sight of what's truly important, because when everything else fades, that's all you'll have left.